Thanks for staying with us. Several boys have died in the Eastern Cape since the start of the initiation season. Parliament, through the Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance, has called for the NPA to prioritise the prosecution of cases relating to illegal initiation schools. There are also calls for some parents of illegal initiates to face the consequences of their action. Let's talk about this further with Nduku, SANAC Civil Society Forum's Deputy Chairperson. Thank you so much for your time this evening. The Customary Initiation Act is very clear that illegal initiation schools must be closed. Yet, year in, year out, we hear about this issue. Why is it still a problem?
Thank you very much for having me this evening. Warm greetings to you and your viewers. We may have all the legislative framework, but our view is that a multi-sectoral and intersectoral collaboration, whereby communities themselves take responsibility and whereby the critical role players take charge of what is customary to them, it remains prudent, because this is about a custom of our communities, which, if there, we have to preserve it. We must make sure that we protect it, and we make sure that it does not degenerate. We take the responsibility as the key role players. When I talk of the key role players in this custom, because as we understand that the issue of initiation is a rite of passage for either a boy child or a girl child into adulthood. So there are people who have got a responsibility. If then the rite of passage of a boy child into manhood, men themselves are not taking responsibility, and the other role players and the traditional leaders, as well as traditional health practitioners. I'm saying traditional health practitioners quite mindful that as per the provisions of Act number 22 of 2007, Traditional Health Practitioners Act of South Africa, it categorized traditional surgeons as one of the 4 categories that are recognized and that ought to be regulated under that piece of legislation, which therefore means that if we want to fight this carnage, if traditional leaders, councillors alone, and government officials, without involvement of the traditional health practitioners as well as the men themselves, we won't be able to address this challenge. But also, as South Africans, we need also to learn from the best practices. I am saying at the backdrop of the fact that I'm fully aware that the rite of passage through initiation of either a boy child or a girl child is preserved and is one of the sacred practices, customary practices that are preserved and guarded closely by the various clans and tribes. So there are clans and tribes that we can learn from them, especially in the Eastern Cape. If you look at the eastern part, and you compare with the central and the western part, you'll see the difference. And you'll ask them to say, if there's insignificant loss of lives in the eastern part, around the Hlubi tribes and Masutu tribes, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that they are doing differently? And why should it take so much long for us not to realize that we must learn from them and see what is it that they do differently? And so make sure that we implement that across.
Pardon me for coming in there, Nduku. I'm keen to find out what the taking of responsibility looks like, because, as you say, it's an important rite of passage, and it must be, really kept with the sanctity it deserves. So, as you say that things must be done differently, looking at, the Western part and how they do these things, what about the role, as you call on the men, to get involved and protect the sanctity of this particular tradition? What does it look like when it comes to them taking responsibility and protecting it at a practical level, so things are done differently to protect the lives of the boys?
Yeah, critically is to strike the balance between the urbanization and the preservation of the custom. So I think that's where the challenge is. And in striking that kind of balance, we cannot be successful in preserving the custom and protect its decorum if we are not ensuring that we resuscitate and strengthen the men's mahucha, who are supposed to be the platforms where men themselves, they discuss under the leadership of traditional leaders, of course, with the guidance from the traditional health practitioners, who actually are the home of the traditional surgeons, who are supposedly in those conversations, in those sacred places of Amahutra, they discuss the pros and cons and address the issues that lead to these actually challenges. I can tell you the reality is, if men take responsibility, you cannot have a traditional surgeon who will initiate actually a child without the knowledge of the parents. You cannot have even a surgeon, because in terms of the customary practice, it is not the surgeons who are supposed to be the host of the initiation schools. So we have to correct. We cannot try and normalize what is abnormal. The surgeons are there to perform a particular scope within the process of the rite of passage. But the custom of the rite of passage of initiating a boy child into manhood, it is the responsibility of the man. And when I'm talking of men, it does not mean that men who do not have experience. I'm talking of seasoned men who have been able to provide guidance under the leadership of traditional leaders.
Now,
and my take on this matter is that as South Africans, we must do the right things and the right way.
The final question then that I ask you tonight, I'm sure you've seen in another province in Limpopo, the death of a 6-year-old boy, a very disturbing story. The province is saying that both the parents and the initiation school have contravened the Limpopo Initiation Schools Act. You look at Section 12, for example, it says no child under 12 should be, inside an initiation school for an initiation process. What responsibility must be taken by parents when it comes to some of these instances that we are seeing?
We must take into account that there is an individual within an individual belongs to a family, and a family belongs to a society or a community. Parents should take the responsibility, but our traditional leaders and the traditional health practitioners, as well as men themselves. Because I think the biggest question that we should ask is to say, where are the men? Because even the men, the number of boys, the list of boys, the list or the number of initiation schools is not something that is done abruptly. Each and every initiation school must be registered within the traditional leader. It must be known, it must be presented in a lekgotla that during the month of June, we are going to have so many initiation schools. And those initiation schools, these are the men who are charged, who are responsible, and the traditional institution deploys the traditional headmen or the traditional leaders who are focusing on the initiation processes.
Right.
As I said, I've referred to on the eastern part of the province of the Eastern Cape, Basotho and Amasobi, they know very well that they are designated traditional counselors who work with the traditional leaders who are focusing on the initiation schools. And if we can go to those basics so that we do not try and actually and dilute this whole discussion, that people who are responsible must take responsibility. If this is a rite of passage to manhood, men must take charge. Traditional leaders must take charge. Traditional health practitioners must take charge, because the traditional surgeons are not loose. They are a category that is actually recognized in terms of the provision of the act, who must be held accountable.
Nduku, thank you so much for your time there. A call for men to, as he says, do more when it comes to taking responsibility around keeping the sanctity of this particular process. I mean, the rite of passage is really important. So he says that a lot needs to be done by men who need to even look at the number of schools that are going to be open ahead of each and every single initiation school. That was Nduku, SANAC Civil Society Forum's Deputy Chairperson.